Hello friends, today we will do chapter number 1, The Shoemaker. Read a story about an imprisoned shoemaker. Good day, said Monsieur Defarge, looking down at the white head that bent low over the shoemaking. It was raised for a moment, and a very faint voice responded to the greeting as if it were at a distance. Good day. You are still hard at work, I see. After a long silence, the head was lifted for another moment, and the voice replied, Yes, I am working. The faintness of the voice was pitiable and dreadful. It was not the faintness of physical weakness through confinement and hard fare, no doubt, that had their part in it. It was the faintness of solitude and disuse. I want, said Defarge, who had not removed his gaze from the shoemaker, to let in a little more light here. You can bear a little more. The half-open door was opened a little further. A broad ray of light fell into the garret and showed the workman with an unfurnished shoe upon his lap, posing in his labor. His few common tools and various scraps of leather were at his feet and on his bench. He had a white beard, raggedly cut, but not very long, a hollow face, and exceedingly bright eyes. His yellow rags of shirt lay open at the throat and showed his body to be withered and worn. He and his old canvas frock, loose stockings, and all his poor tatters of clothes had in a long seclusion from direct light and air faded down to such a dull uniformity of parchment yellow that it would have been so hard to say which was which. The shoemaker never looked at the figure before him without first looking down on this side of himself, then on that, as if he had lost the habit of associating place with sound. He never spoke without first wandering in this manner and forgetting to speak. Mr. Lorry came silently forward, leaving Lois, the shoemaker's daughter, by the door. When he had stood for a minute or two by the side of Defarge, the shoemaker looked up. He showed no surprise at seeing another figure. You have a visitor, you see, said Monsieur Defarge. What did you say? Here is a visitor. The shoemaker looked up as before, but without removing a hand from his work. Come, said Defarge. Here is Monsieur, who knows a well-made shoe when he sees one. Show him that shoe you are working on. Take it, Monsieur. Mr. Lorry took it in his hand. Tell Monsieur what kind of shoe it is and the maker's name. There was a longer pause than usual before the shoemaker replied. I forgot what it was you asked me. What did you say? I said, couldn't you describe the kind of shoe for Monsieur's information? It's a lady shoe. It is a young lady's walking shoe. It is in the present mode. I never saw the mode. I have had a pattern in my hand. He glanced at the shoe with some little passing touch of pride. "And the maker's name," said Defarge. Now that he had no work to hold, he laid the knuckles of the right hand in the hollow of the left, and then the knuckles of the left hand in the hollow of the right, and then passed hand across his beard chin, and so on in regular changes without a moment's intermission, the task of recalling him from the vagrancy into which he always sank when he had spoken was like recalling some very weak person from a swoon, or endeavouring in the hope of some disclosure to stay the spirit of a fast-dying man. "Did you ask me for my name?" "Surely I did." 105 North Tower. "Is that all?" 105 North Tower, with a weary sound that was not a sigh nor a groan. He bent to work again until the silence was again broken. His haggard eyes turned to Defarge as if he would have transferred the question to him, but as no help came from that quarter, they turned back to the questioner when they had sought the ground. "I am not a shoemaker by trade." "No, I was not a shoemaker by trade. I learnt it here. I taught myself. I asked leave to." He lapsed away again for minutes. His eyes came back slowly at last to the face from which they had wandered when they rested on it. He started and resumed in the manner of a sleeper that moment awake, reverting to a subject of last night. "I asked leave to teach myself, and I got it with much difficulty after a long while, and I have made shoes ever since." As he held out his hand for the shoe that had been taken from him, Mr. Lorry said, still looking steadfastly in his face, "Monsieur Manette, do you remember nothing of me?" The shoe dropped to the ground, and he sat looking fixedly at the question answered. "Monsieur Manette." Mr. Lorry laid his hand upon Defarge's arm. "Do you remember nothing of this man? Look at him. Look at me. Is there no old banker, no old business, no old servant, no old time rising in your mind, Monsieur Manette?" As the shoemaker sat looking fixedly by turns at Mr. Lorry and at Defarge, some long obliterated marks of an actively intent intelligence in the middle of the forehead gradually forced themselves through the black mist that had fallen on him. They were overclouded again. They were fainter. They were gone, but they had been there, and so exactly was the expression repeated on the fair young face of her who had crept along the wall to a point where she could see him, and where she now stood looking at him with hands which at first had been only raised in frightened compassion, if not even to keep him off and shut out the sight of him, but which were now extending towards him, trembling with eagerness to hold his face and love it back to life and hope. So exactly was the expression repeated on her face. Darkness had fallen on him in its place. He looked at the two, less and less attentively, and his eyes, in gloomy abstraction, sought the ground and looked about him in the old way. Finally, with a deep, long sigh, he resumed his work. "Have you recognized him, monsieur?" asked Defarge in a whisper. "Yes, for a moment. At first I thought it's quite hopeless, but I have unconscionably seen for a moment that face that I once knew so well. Hush! Let us draw further back. Hush!" She had moved from the wall of the garret, near to the bench on which he sat. There was something awful in his unconsciousness of the figure that could have put out his hand and touched him as he stopped over his labor. It happened at length that he had the occasion to change the instrument in his hand for his shoemaker's knife. It lay on that side of him which was not the side on which she stood. He had taken it up and was stopping to work again, when his eyes caught the skirt of her dress. He raised them and saw her face. The two spectators started forward, but she stayed them with a motion of her hand. She had no fear of his striking at her with the knife, though they had. He stared at her with a fearful look, and after a while his lips began to form some words, though no sound produced from them. By degrees, in the pauses of his quick and labored breathing, he was heard to say, "What is this?" With tears streaming down her face, she put her two hands to her lips and kissed them to him. "You are not the gallows daughter," she sighed. "No. Who are you?" Not yet trusting the tones of her voice, she sat down on the bench beside him. He recoiled, but she laid her hand upon his arm. A strange thrill struck him when she did so, and visibly passed over his frame. He laid the knife down softly as he sat staring at her, advancing his hand little by little. He took it up and looked at it. In the midst of this action he went astray, and with another deep sigh fell to work at his shoemaking. An extract from A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Thank you, friends.